Every day, something new keeps happening in this that requires me to post another episode here to update you. I'm recording this on the day that it was confirmed a nurse in the Dallas hospital has Ebola, contracted it from Mr. Thomas Duncan, the first Ebola victim in America, patient zero. And there are some really important considerations to understand about what happened. But first, let me just tell you this episode is about isolation at home. Yes, finally, the episode that I promised you many episodes ago is here. I'm going to talk about how to isolate yourself or a family member or someone that you might be giving safe harbor to in your own home, assuming that they have Ebola or that they might have Ebola, and you want to protect the rest of your family members or yourself from that person while also providing care for that person. We'll talk about that scenario here in this episode. And you may wonder, well, wait a minute, why can't they just go to the hospital? Well, the hospitals are going to be closed down, folks. The emergency room of the Dallas Presbyterian Hospital is already closed. They closed it today the minute they learned that a nurse there contracted Ebola from a patient. And now, let me cover this first. There's so many important things to understand. Number one, we were told by the CDC and the White House that Ebola would not spread in America. And then we were told that the reason for that is because we have the best hospitals in the world. Well, Ebola just spread in the best hospital in the world. You know, a first world hospital in Dallas, Texas, a modern day, high-tech, high-cost hospital. It's not some ghetto hospital there that this guy was in. This is a mainstream, high-tech, advanced medicine hospital, and it spread there. We're also told that the CDC recommendations for protective gear are perfectly adequate, that the medical staff is fully trained, that the hospital has all the capabilities that it needs to care for this patient. Don't worry, there's no risk, nothing's going to happen that's bad. You know, go home and eat your Fruit Loops, or whatever you're munching on. So it turns out that, of course, Ebola was caught by a healthcare worker who was wearing protective gear. She was wearing the CDC recommended protective gear. She was following the protocols. She had the training. She was in the isolation room. She was caring for Mr. Duncan, the patient zero, and yet she caught it anyway. Now, if you go back to some of the earlier episodes of this course, Pandemic Preparedness, you'll remember me warning about this happening in America. I gave this warning over and over and over again. I said, you need to have level 4 biohazard equipment to be around patients who have Ebola. You can't slap on a pair of gloves and an N95 mask and a pair of goggles and waltz into this guy's room, which is totally contaminated with Ebola. Because all it takes is 4 or 5 little microscopic particles of Ebola. All it takes is those getting on your skin and into a scrape or a cut or a scratch, or getting them on your fingers and then touching the corner of your eye to scratch your eye or scratch your nose, or just touching the corner of your mouth. That's all it takes. And then you're infected. And in fact, as I've been warning all along, Ebola can contaminate surfaces. And then if someone touches that surface, they can be infected from that surface. Now, the CDC, to this very day, continues to insist that Ebola can only be caught through, quote, direct contact with the body fluids of an Ebola patient. Direct contact. Now, to most people, that means you have to be touching the patient in order to catch Ebola. But that's not true. It's a big lie. And I've called out the CDC on this lie over and over and over again, tried to warn people, even tried to warn medical staff, that this can be caught indirectly. The Ebola patient can touch a surface, that surface is contaminated, and then if you come along and touch that surface, you can now be infected with Ebola. So how is this playing out in the Dallas hospitals? Well, what we think is happening right now is that the nurse, the health worker, a woman who was infected and confirmed today as having Ebola, that she may have contaminated the surface of her protective gear with Ebola, and then she infected herself as she was removing the gear. In other words, if you get Ebola on your gloves, but then you're taking off your gloves in a way that you touch the outside of the glove with your bare finger, and then you use that finger to scratch the corner of your eye, then boom, you're infected. So that is what's called an indirect transmission of Ebola. And that is almost certainly what has happened in the Dallas hospital. And what it means is that until the CDC tells the truth, until people are properly trained and have the proper equipment, which should be level 4 biohazard positive pressure spacesuits, essentially, that until that happens, we're going to see more and more infections of doctors and nurses and healthcare workers because they aren't being given the proper gear, they aren't being given the proper training, and frankly, these hospitals don't have the proper isolation rooms. I guarantee you that the room where Mr. Duncan was being kept at this Dallas Presbyterian Hospital, this was not a level 4 biohazard containment room. I know that as a fact. In fact, there is no such room in that hospital. There are rooms like that at Emory and Nebraska and the U.S. Army virology research centers, places like that, but there's only a handful of these places across the entire country of the United States. And if there is an Ebola outbreak and you try to take patients to those centers, they're going to be overrun in no time. There might only be a couple dozen beds in the entire country that are level 4 biohazard isolation rooms. Everything else runs the risk of causing infections, of spreading the disease, which is exactly what just happened in Dallas, Texas, as of this morning, which is October 12th, 2014. So now all these claims that we've heard that it's not going to spread, it's not going to be in America, there's nothing to worry about. I've even heard people trying to downplay this and say, well, it's hard to catch, they say. It's really hard to catch. Well, if it's hard to catch, then how did this healthcare worker get it when she was wearing all the isolation gear? If it's hard to catch, how did Dr. Brantley get it? When he's a medical doctor, properly trained in isolation, wearing protective gear, how did he get it? How did all these other doctors and nurses in Africa get it if it's hard to catch? Why is it doubling the number of infected patients every 3 to 4 weeks if it's hard to catch? Clearly it's not hard to catch. It's pretty dang easy to catch. It's easy to catch. That's why it's spreading so effectively. If it were hard to catch, it wouldn't be an outbreak. It would have already been contained long ago. So these people who are just trying to downplay the scenario are acting very irresponsibly and potentially even putting other people's lives at risk by not acknowledging the severity of the routes of transmission for Ebola. And this has been my main concern from the very beginning, that we have to take this seriously. Ebola is a level 4 biohazard. And that means that you need to have a positive pressure suit or at minimum a full face respirator with a complete body suit. Every gap in the suit has to be taped up. You have to completely decontaminate the suit before you take it off. And you'd really be better off in a positive pressure suit, like a space suit, with a connected air hose that inflates the suit. And even then, you're going to need multiple layers of gloves inside the suit, just in case you cut one layer, or there's a tear in the suit, or there's a needle jab that punctures the suit, which is a very common occurrence in these biohazard labs. There are all kinds of conditions like that. That's why it's a positive pressure suit. So if you jab it with a needle, the positive air pressure blows the air out the hole, and you don't actually get air coming into the hole and infecting you. So until we do this, I don't think we're going to be very successful containing Ebola in any country. I think it's going to continue to spread until we treat it with the level of seriousness that it calls for. And I know there must be active and also retired virologists who worked for the U.S. military, maybe U.S. Army, Fort Detrick researchers, who perhaps were even involved in the Reston outbreak back in the 1990s. There was Ebola Reston, that experienced an outbreak and infected many scientists at that time, but they were able to contain it. They treated Ebola at that time as if it were a very dangerous level 4 biohazard, and that's why they were able to contain it. They went into that monkey house and they brought out literally tons of dead monkeys, hundreds of them, I think over 500 dead monkeys, and they incinerated them because that was the only way that they could be sure that they would be able to destroy the Ebola virus and to make sure that it remained destroyed. And then they went in, they had to scrub down the whole place with bleach and ultraviolet light and all kinds of treatments. And even after that, nobody would rent it. So I think the building remained abandoned for a very long time. It may still be abandoned today. That's the place where the outbreak happened in the 1990s. And now then, today, all of a sudden, you've got these people in the media that are saying, well, it's no big deal. It's hard to catch. Yeah, all you need is a mask and a pair of gloves and a pair of goggles and you're good, And then you've got these people in Dallas walking in and out of Duncan's apartment, wearing no gear whatsoever, no gloves, no mask, nothing. And acting like they're authorities who know what they're doing. They don't know what they're doing. They're fools. And they're fools who may pay for that foolishness with their own lives if they get infected. So I just want to be perfectly clear that Ebola is a level 4 biohazard. And I know our government can water down all the other news out there. They can say, oh, the national debt, it doesn't matter. The unemployment rate, don't worry about it. It's only 5.9%, they'll say. Everything's fine. Don't worry about these things. But when they try that with Ebola, believe me when I say the Ebola virus itself doesn't care about the spin and the propaganda. The Ebola virus doesn't care how expensive your healthcare system is. It doesn't care how advanced your hospital technology is. It doesn't care about your skin color. The Ebola virus is going to infect people and spread simply because it can. And it doesn't listen to spin or propaganda or denials. It simply infects and replicates. That's all it does. And it's damn good at it. And if you don't take that threat seriously, if you don't respect the ability of the virus to spread and replicate, then you can be destroyed by it. And that's my warning for America, a warning which fortunately is beginning to be heeded by more and more people out there as this unfolds. Now let's get into the isolation strategies for your own home, as I promised for this section. The likely scenarios that we're going to run into here in the middle of an outbreak is that you will be quarantined in your own home. I talked about this in the last chapter. The hospitals obviously will be completely overrun. There won't be beds available. They'll be shut down. People who are sick or symptomatic will be told to go home. People will be told to shelter in place, stay in your own homes. Under medical martial law, there will be martial law declared in a sufficiently large outbreak. That could be declared for one city or an entire state or even an entire nation. Once that is declared, you're going to have to be in your house. And I've already talked about the need to have extra supplies, food, water, communications, emergency medicine, some currency, something that you can barter with, something for self-defense, all of these basic needs, personal hygiene needs, for example. So I'm not going to repeat all that here. But now let's talk about the scenario where you are quarantined in your own home, but then a family member or friend is symptomatic. Maybe that person showed up at your house and they're asking for help, or possibly that person already lived there. Maybe it's your spouse. Maybe it's you, and you need to isolate yourself, but then teach your family how to care for you while they protect themselves. So let's talk about that. And this is why it's so good that we had that discussion at the first 10 minutes of this chapter, because now you know that Ebola can contaminate surfaces. So what you are going to have to do is you're going to have to build, as best you can, a clean room environment in your own home, which is not easy to do. But I'm going to give you some advice and some instruction here. I can't warranty this information. It's being offered for free anyway, but use it as best you can, and understand that I can't guarantee that this will offer you 100% protection. But here's the strategy behind it. Number one, let's assume that you're going to isolate a family member in a bedroom. And let's just pick a standard bedroom size of 10 by 10 feet or 10 by 12 or 10 by 14, whatever. I'll just say 10 by 10. What you need to do, first of all, is you need to get that person into that room, and then you need to seal off that room from the rest of the house. You're going to need a very large amount of plastic sheeting in order to be able to do this. Now, this plastic sheeting is a non-permeable surface. The virus can't drill its way through the plastic sheeting, so this is a good barrier. So get that person into that room, and put up some plastic sheeting inside the room.